Good morning, class. Once again, this is PLAR History and Geography. My name again is Jonathan, and again, I'm the teacher for PLAR History and Geography. Not so much housekeeping announcement for today, other than the fact that we're starting week 4, class 2. Okay, so again, like I mentioned last class, my goal is to finish the history portion for this course this week and today. Okay, so that's my goal, and I think we'll get there. So, which means that next week we'll be starting geography section. Okay, so for those students who don't need history, we'll be starting the history credit or portion next week, kind of thing. But for those who need both sections, we'll just continue along. Okay. Alrighty. Again, I just want to thank all those students who have been submitting their assignments. That's fantastic, great job. Again, please continue to work on your assignments and continue to submit your assignments whenever you get the chance, okay? Alright, let's begin. So we have started talking about lesson 3, what was Canada like in the 60s and onwards, last class. Last class we talked about the Quiet Revolution, okay? And which means that today we're going to finish off this lesson and we're going to talk about the Canada Act and the Free Trade Agreement. Okay, so those are the two other topics that we're going to finish off today. But like always, I'm going to do a quick review of what we talked about last class so that you can refresh your memory when doing your assignments, or that if you missed it, you can always go back right now and answer those questions. Okay, so again, like always, we're going to do a brief review about what we talked about last class on the Quiet Revolution, and then we'll talk about the Canada Act and the Free Trade Agreement. Okay. And once I finish talking about our review for last class, I'll talk about what our learning goals for today are. Okay. Again, just a reminder, if you're following along on in your textbook, I am on page 19 and 20. Okay, page 19 and 20. Again, if you have any questions, please just let me know, and I'll answer your question. Okay. Okay, so last class, again, we talked about the Quiet Revolution. So just a quick review on that. So during this time period, during the 60s, again, um, we had English-speaking Canadians and French-speaking Canadians. Okay, so remember how these are the two main, cultures and the city in Canada during this time period, or two main dominant language speaking in Canada. So we got the English and the French. The English and the French always had, conflicting points of views and opinions towards one another's. Okay, the French-speaking society always had their own culture, their own identity. So in this case, we're talking a lot about Quebec. Okay, Quebec as a whole, as a province. Okay, so this is where all the main dominant French-speaking Canadians are located. Okay, so again, like we talked about, you recall for our, back in lesson 1, like I said, the French-speaking and English-speaking Canadian had, disagreement about how Canada should run and what it means to be Canadian. French Canadians have worried about English Canada's influence on their culture and economy. Many Quebec citizens feel that the best solution for Quebec would be to separate themselves from Canada as a whole and as a nation. Okay, so Quebec wants to be its own distinct nation, its own distinct sovereignty, its own culture, their own economy, and their own way of life. Okay, this is what Quebec citizens and the French-speaking Canadians want. Okay, so this is what is continuing during this time period. Okay, with the conflicting views of the English and the French. Okay, and then we talked about, this individual named Maurice Duplessis. He was a French Quebec premier of the Union Nationale Party during this time period, just before the 60s. He really pushed for this term called nationalism. Okay, nationalism. Again, you'll see this term a lot when it comes to French, Quebec, and this whole, you know, identity and sovereignty issues with French-speaking Quebec citizens. Okay, so nationalism. Again, just to quick reminder what nationalism is. Again, it's just pride in one country, their own culture. Really take pride in what they believe in. So in this case, it would be the French culture. Okay, it's just nationalism. Okay. So basically, Maurice Duplessis, again, he really encouraged this term called nationalism. So in Quebec, he was the premier of the Quebec province during this time period. And again, he encouraged American and British and English Canadian investment in the Quebec economy. As a result, the economy of Quebec was soon controlled by outsiders. Okay, so outside influence was started to control Quebec economy. So by the 50s, French Canadians had to be able to speak English in order to get a job in their own province. Soon there was growing resentment by Quebec's university graduates seeking for jobs in Quebec businesses. Okay, so basically, again, Maurice Duplessis, he pushed for this term called nationalism, but again, he was still pushing for terms that was influenced by the English. Okay, it was similar to influence, so like it was still controlled by the Catholic Church. He still had those points of view as like an English society that he was started to build in Quebec. Okay, so basically after Maurice Duplessis died in office, this is what the kick and start of the Quiet Revolution. Okay, the Quiet Revolution. Again, you'll see this term a lot. It's bolded. It's in capital letters. Okay, just a reminder again, anything that's bolded and capital in your textbook. Key reminder that you'll see it again, which means it's important. So the Quiet Revolution. So basically, in your assignment 7, there's a question that I believe that states, why was the Quiet Revolution called quiet or something like that. Okay, so basically, again, the Quiet Revolution started in 1960, lasted between 1966. Quebec experienced a revolution or a great change in the way Quebec people thought about themselves and the rest of Canada. So remember, it was called quiet for a few reasons. Okay. Again, I'm gonna pause right here. So again, we got Fort Hope on the line. Good morning over there at Fort Hope.
Good morning.
Morning. Who do I have on the line at the moment today, this morning?
What?
Who's listening right now over at Fort Hope?
Just me and Nate.
Oh, Nate. Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nate, for listening this morning. Again, Nate, if you have any questions throughout my lessons today, please, Nate, just ask, okay?
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you, Nate. All right, someone's trying to control my smartboard screen, but that's okay. Um, Anyways, continue on with my lessons. So again, the Quiet Revolution. Why was it called the Quiet Revolution? Okay, so usually when you hear the term revolution, it means an uproar, protesting, violence, angry people trying to make change. But this was different. This was different. It's called the Quiet Revolution because it was achieved. As you recall, it was achieved not through guns and forces, but it was achieved through change by magazines, newspaper articles. Okay, there wasn't any violence in terms of this revolution. Okay, that's why it was called the Quiet Revolution. Okay, so there's no guns, no violence, no forces, but it was achieved through magazines and newspaper articles in order to change political, legislative. Okay. So Quebec people wanted to protect and promote French culture. Okay, that's what they wanted. Um, as you recall, Quebec is a giant, big province, bigger than most countries. Okay, it's has a good wealth, good natural resources, good agriculture. So as a result, they really want to protect their culture, their language, and their people. And as a result, they said that they wanted to leave Canada and become their own separate country or nation that way. People in Quebec, the French-speaking English Canadians felt discriminated against the social, culture, and political and economic views, okay, because they want to be different. So again, that's why they want to become different. That's why they become different. Okay, so that was what the Quiet Revolution was all about. Again, just a reminder, the Quiet Revolution was a period of non-violent change responsible for the beginning of a modern and secular Quebec. Okay, they want to be different. Okay, so basically, after Maurice Duplessis died during his time in office, a guy named Jean Lesage took over as Premier Quebec, and he really pushed for change. Okay, he really wanted to change, so he promised a lot of things for Quebec citizens in the French speaking. Okay, so he wanted moral control, and Lesage passed many laws to improve the life for the average Quebec citizens. Okay, so you want to take away the power from the English and put it back into the French minority. Okay. Again, like he improved businesses, changed education laws and such in order to make it more, French society approved kind of thing. Okay, that's what he really pushed for. Again, this is what the French citizen people population of Quebec wanted, and he promised this. Alright, so that's actually called FLQ. Okay, so basically, John said she promised all these change, but the change wasn't really happening fast enough. Okay, it wasn't really happening fast enough, and it wasn't really pleasing the French citizens, English Canadians society. Okay, so what happened was that a terrorist group called the FLQ, as you recall from last class, FLQ, which stands for the Front de la Liberation du Quebec. If you translate that into English, it stands for Quebec Liberation Front. So basically, what you need to remember is that the FLQ is a terrorist group, and they used a lot of violence in order to get what they wanted, which was Quebec independence. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Again, there's another question on your assignment 7 that says who were the FLQ. Okay, so the FLQ were the terrorist group that felt that violence was the only way in order to win Quebec independence. That's called the FLQ. They set bombs, set explosive around the city of Montreal and Quebec. They kidnapped key figures such as James Cross, who was the British Trade Commissioner. He also kidnapped Pierre Laporte, who was the Deputy Premier of Quebec. And as you recall, Pierre Laporte was eventually killed. This fella right here, who was eventually killed by the FLQ. So as you recall, what happened was that our Prime Minister during this time period, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, he invoked the War Measures Act. Okay, he invoked the War Measures Act, which allowed Quebec police to arrest FLQ members without laying any charges. They can just detain people, arrest people. Okay, this is really important to note because as you remember, under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, we have legal acts, legal rights, sorry, that protects us as citizens against government abusing of power. But what Trudeau did was that he used the War Measures Act. Okay, so remember his name, Pierre Trudeau, Pierre Trudeau, and basically what he was responsible for was the War Measures Act. Okay, so if you link those two together, you'll remember that. Okay, a lot of controversy. Not many people agree with what Trudeau did. Some did, some didn't. Okay. So basically, in the end, René Lévesque was eventually, the new leader called the Parti Québécois, um, and eventually Quebec citizens and the French-speaking French-speaking citizens of Canada realized that independence and peaceful means was the only way to, solve their crisis. Okay. So are there any questions at the moment in regards to the Quiet Revolution? Okay, on any materials that we have covered in class? Okay, so again, this is just a quick review of what we talked about last class. Um, Again, assignment 7 can now be completed. Really short assignment. It's only 2 questions, only out of 8 marks. Okay, so hopefully this assignment can be completed as quickly as possible and get it to me. Okay, just to review, assignment 7, question 1 says provide specific details to describe the Quiet Revolution. Why was the revolution necessary for the people of Quebec? And what did various political leaders do in order to support this revolution? Okay, so out of 5 marks, okay, lots of details in your answers. Question number 2, what was the FLQ? So keyword FAQ, what does FLQ stand for? And briefly describe it as an organization, okay? Talked about again today, what were their main goal? Name 2 things that the FLQ was responsible for doing. Okay, so name me 2 things. What did they do? Okay, um, what did they do? Again, I talked about today in class. Pretty straightforward. Um, Pretty straightforward. Okay. Yeah, pretty straightforward. Okay, they set up bombs and explosive, and they did a lot of kidnapping of key figures. Okay, hint, hint right there. Okay, again, all the answers, all the materials are in your textbook. So please make sure you read your textbook. It's there for a reason. If you don't have it, talk to your DEC or talk to me, and we'll get it to you. Okay. Again, there's no surprises. Again, this might be some slightly different pictures on my slides, but all the materials, all of what you need is in your textbook, okay? Perfect. Okay, with that being said, I'm going to stop that right there, and we're going to move on with our lesson for today. So today, we're going to finish up part 2 of lesson 3, where we're going to talk about the Canada Act and the Free Trade Agreement. Okay, so basically your learning goals for today are you will be learning about the Canada Act and the Free Trade Agreement. You'll learn about the Meech Lake Accord. You'll also learn about Canadian key woman figures in Canada. Okay, so we'll talk about that in a bit at the end. Again, like I said, you'll be able to explain why the countries of NAFTA want this agreement and the benefits it provides. Okay, so again, we'll talk about the Canada Act, the Free Trade Agreement, key Canadian women in politics, and we talked about NAFTA. Okay, maybe 4 topics we're going to cover today. Okay, again, nothing big. Okay, just pretty straightforward material. Okay, all right, Canada Act. Let's put this in. Yeah, we'll put it in blue. Canada Act. Okay, we'll talk about that right now. Alright, so the Canada Act was also known as the Constitution Act. Okay, I like the name Constitution Act better, but since the textbook and since all your lessons refer to as the Canada Act, I'm going to refer it to as the Canada Act. Again, it's also known as the Constitution Act. The Canada Act was signed on April 17th, 1982. Okay, this is when this act was signed. Okay, I'm gonna put that in I'm gonna underline that, and I'm gonna put it in a little box because you'll need to remember that date for one of your questions for your next assignment. Okay, So the Canada Act was signed on April 17, 1982. So what was the Canada Act? Okay, so why was this so significant? Again, the Canada Act, or the Constitution Act, basically gives Canada control over its own nation, its own sovereignty. Um, we can control, our political views and changes without asking Britain. Okay, so again, as you remember, way back in like lesson 1, lesson 2, Canada was really linked to the British Empire. We're a part of the British colony. Therefore, whatever Britain did, whatever the British Empire did, um, it it really influenced Canada as a country. Okay, um, it really influenced us as a country. But when the Canada Act or the Constitution Act was signed on April 17th, 1982, that changes things. Okay, this gives Canada complete control over its own constitution. Okay, so remember our Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Um, he created the Charter of Rights and Freedom. So the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom, like I talked about before, is entrenched into the Constitution. It is a part of the Canada Act. Okay, so all that, all your fundamental rights and legal rights as a Canadian citizens and as an individual is outlined in the Canada Act. Okay, so the Canada Act and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms are like together. Okay, they're two pieces of acts and legislative together. So again, basically, Canada does not need permission from Britain in order to change its laws or whatever we want to do. However, the Queen still has some political power over Canada. Okay, so the Queen is the head of state, so we should never forget the Queen. But again, now Canada as a country has full sovereignty, control, and over its realm. Okay, which means, like I said, that Canada, as its own country, as its own nation, has control over what we want it to do. Okay, so that's basically what the Canada Act was. Okay, so basically all the province agreed with this, except for Quebec. Quebec once again. Quebec felt that they will lose their individuality and just become another province if they sign and if they agree with the Canada Act or the Constitution Act. Okay. The Constitution Act or the Canada Act in 1982 allowed Canada to make changes to its governance frame of the country. The term, however, did not meet the needs of all Canadians. Some were concerned not everyone's rights would be protected under the Charter of Rights and Freedom. Other people had concern about problems that the Constitution failed to address. Added to all this, many Canadians believed that unless Quebec's concerns were addressed, there was a high probability that Canada as a nation will break apart. So basically, the Constitution Act or the Canada Act of 1982 applies to everyone, even Quebec, even though they didn't sign it. But people felt that their concerns and the issues should be addressed. Okay? So what happened with Quebec and the Canada Act or the Constitution Act? So what happened? Since Quebec didn't sign it, like I said, all the provinces agreed with it. They signed it. Quebec didn't sign it, even though it still applied to Quebec. So what happened was that in 1984, this man named Brian Mulroney, he was the prime minister at the time. This fella right here, Brian Mulroney. Okay, so again, remember his name. You'll see his name pop up again. It's a Brian Mulroney. You can say it with me, okay? Brian Mulroney. Okay, it's bolded. It's in capital letters. I'm on page 21 right now in your textbook, near the bottom. A little section on Brian Mulroney. So make sure you remember his name as well, okay? And he was the prime minister during this time. So what he did was that he wanted to please Quebec as a province. Okay, like I said, Quebec didn't sign the Canada Act, so he wanted Quebec to be a part of the Canada Act, of the Constitution Act, okay, to make it stronger as a nation or as a country. Okay, so what he did in order to please Quebec was that he wanted to make an agreement with Quebec and please them. So what he did was he developed something called the Meech Lake Accord. I'm gonna put that in green. The Meech Lake Accord. Again, bolded, stands out. The Meech Lake Accord. So what the Meech Lake Accord was that it recognized Quebec as a distinct society. Ooh, big words, big words. Okay, so the Meech Lake Accord recognized Quebec as a distinct society. Okay, this is what Brian Mulroney proposed. This is what he wanted to do in order to please, in order to get Quebec to be a part of Canada and under the Canada Act. He proposed the Meech Lake Accord, which recognized Quebec as a distinct society. Okay, so what does that mean? You may be wondering, what does that mean? Well, it just means that Quebec will be recognized as the own nation, own country, own sovereignty. They're different. They have their own, culture, economics, influence, political views. They're just different, but still part of Canada. Is what it means. Okay. So if I scroll down here again, this is not in your textbook, but under the Meech Lake Accord, okay, there were 5 things that really stood out under this agreement. Okay, I'm just gonna briefly read them out. Again, this is not in your textbook, but this is just more background details of what the Meech Lake Accord was. Okay, so one, it allowed a constitutional veto, which means that any province could block any constitution amendment. 2, again, it recognized Quebec as a distinct society. 3, the right to have the Supreme Court justice appoint from names of lists created by the province of Quebec. 4, the limitation of the federal spending power, namely an allowance for the province to withdraw any national programs to create its own federal monies. It's basically whatever Canada did, Quebec can reject it. Okay. 5, a greater provincial control of immigration. Okay, so this is what the Meech Lake Accord, stated. Again, this was proposed by Brian Mulroney. So what happened? So basically, what happened was that an MP in Manitoba named Elijah Harper. Does anyone recognize this name, Elijah Harper? Have you heard this name before? Nate in over Fort Hope, have you recognized the name Elijah Harper before?
Nope.
Nope. Okay. So he's an interesting figure. He's part of he is First Nation, so Elijah Harper is First Nation. So I thought maybe some of us may have recognized his name. Again, not a key political figures in terms of Canadian history and what he did. So basically what happened with the Meech Lake Accord was that Elijah Harper, this fellow right here, he did great things for us. Basically what he did was that he basically said that, hey, if Quebec was going to be treated as a distinct society, why can't we? Okay, why can't we, in terms of First Nation, Indigenous, Aboriginal people, be recognized as our own distinct society as well? Okay, so basically Elijah Harper, he's a Cree Indian, he's a political legislative member of Manitoba. This is what he argued, this is what he debated. Okay, so Elijah Harper, again, he argues hey, if Quebec is being recognized and treated as different, as a distinct society, why can't we, the First Nations, Indigenous, Aboriginal people be recognized as a distinct nation or society as well? Okay, so basically, since he stepped up and voiced his opinion, kind of stopped this. Okay, it kind of stopped this. Basically, what happened was that the Meech Lake Accord was never signed. It was never passed. Okay, it was just a proposal that was proposed by Brian Mulroney but it was never actually passed, thanks to Elijah Harper. Okay, so he stood up, he fought for First Nations, Indigenous, Aboriginal people rights as an individual. Okay, so that's why he was a key figure. Okay. Again, any questions about the Canada Act or the Constitution Act? All right. All right. So we're gonna move along. I'm going to talk about our next section. We're going to talk about the free trade. Free trade. In other words, NAFTA. Again, another acronym. NFTA. NAFTA. Again, this is on page 22. The next page, you flip the page over in your textbook. Okay, we'll talk about free trade. So what does free trade mean, and what is free trade? And what does NAFTA basically stands for? So NAFTA stands for the North American Free Trade Agreement. Again, bold it, can't miss it. NAFTA stands for North American Free Trade Agreement. So basically what it means is that there can now be free trade. You could trade goods and supplies between Canada, Mexico, and the United States, okay, without having to pay for taxes. I'm going to put that in one line agreement. So basically, free trade, you could trade goods between countries without taxes. Okay, I'm going to put a little happy face beside it, because that's good. That's a good thing. Okay, this is what positive things about free trades. Okay, again, free trade, NAFTA basically means that countries like Canada, Mexico, and the United States, you can trade goods, supplies back and forth between each other without paying for taxes. Okay, that's the plus side of it. However, there's always, some negative consequences too. We'll talk about the bad side of free trade. Okay, I'm going to underline that in red. Okay, so again, there's going to be a question in the next assignment that asks you about your thoughts on free trade. Okay, and I'll get more to that in just a sec. So NAFTA, or free trade, it was signed or it became law in 1994. Okay, it was, some thought it was great, that we can trade goods back and forth without paying for taxes, because no one wants to pay taxes, more money we gotta give away. But again, that's the positive side. But the negative side was that some people disagree with NAFTA. Okay, again, some people disagree with free trade, mainly because workers in Mexico are often not unionized. Okay, they don't have a union. Okay, they're often paid less to work in Mexico, so we pay them cheap. Think of minimum wage, but even less. Okay, even less, which cause problems. Okay, which this would cause many business to move to Mexico, so that they can produce goods at a much cheaper rate. Okay, so this would cause many businesses to move to Mexico and still produce the products much cheaper. Okay, so basically, so why not? Okay, so countries like Canada and the United States have companies and they want to produce something, send it to Mexico, because they can build it and produce it much cheaper. Okay, that's cheaper. That's one bad side about NAFTA and free trade. Another bad side about free trade is that some American companies operate their factories in Canada because the American dollar is stronger. Okay, which means that it's cheaper to pay labor in Canada. Okay, all this known as the branch plants. Okay, so I'm put a little sad face beside all this. Okay, so there's some pros and cons, you know. So there's the pro, which is the good thing about free trade, which is no tax. You can trade good with no tax. But the bad side, this is the con or the bad. Not necessarily bad, but just negative things to think about free trade. Okay? Questions? Questions about NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, or free trade in general? Any questions? Any questions? All right. So let's quickly talk about your last assignment for PLARHG history. Okay, your last assignment. Okay, all 60 marks. Question number one asks, when was the Canada Act signed? When was the Canada Act signed? And what did this act do for Canada? Okay, it's a two-part question. So for the first part, looking for, the year or the date. Okay, that's basically what I'm asking. What I'm looking for. When was the Canada Act signed? So I'm looking for the date or the year or when was it signed. Okay, the other part of the question was what did it do for Canada? Okay, what did this act do for Canada? Okay, so its purpose. Okay, the purpose. So the goal. Okay. Question number two. So this is like your opinion. Okay. Do you think? Okay. Do you think North American, Canada, United States, Mexico, whatever, include other countries in the free trade agreement? Why and why not? Okay. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. Okay. So it can be, uh, yes, I think, North America will include other countries in the free trade agreement, or no, I do not think North America will include other countries. And state why and because, because dot. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so you have to say either what yes or no, and then why. Okay, and explain why you feel this way. Okay, and again, there's no right or wrong answer, but make sure your answer is, makes sense and, it's convincing and it's realistic in a way. Okay, you can't just be like, no, I don't think so because, blah, 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 blah kind of thing. Okay, so just make sure you explain why. This is your opinion. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Do you think North America, uh, Canada, United States, and Mexico will ever include other countries in a free trade agreement? Why or why not? Okay, so it'll be, again, either yes or no. Oh no, and tell me why. Okay, tell me why. Okay, that's the first part of this assignment. Okay. We do have a bit of time, so I'm gonna try to finish off this section right here. Again, I may be going a bit quick, it seems like. I know there's a lot of material, a lot of details, but again, don't worry. I always do review each time we're together. And again, you can always ask me questions, or something you want me to, go back and look for or explain again. Okay? But again, my goal is to get this done today. Then we can, move on with geography next class and so. Okay. So again, I'm still on page 22 and page 23. Last section that we're going to talk about today is that we're going to look at Canadian women in politics. Canadian women in politics. Uh, we have looked lots about women in towards of Canadian histories. How they what their roles were. In terms of their employment, the families, the education, um, gaining the right to vote and such. But now we're going to look at key Canadian women figures in terms of politics. Okay, in terms of politics. Why were they important? What did they do in terms of politics, in terms of Canadian history? What made them so important, or what did they do, basically? Okay, again, all this information is in your textbook. It's on page 22, 23, and page 24. We'll look at four key women in terms of Canadian politics, four of them. Okay, again, make sure you remember these names because you'll see them again. You'll see them again. So I'll make sure I'll put their names in a little fancy box so that you'll remember. All right, so the first person we're going to talk about is Jen Sevi. This woman right here. Okay. So what made her important? What made her important? Well, basically, she was the first woman in Canadian politics or history to become the Governor General of Canada. Okay. She was the first Governor General and woman in Canada. Okay, that's what made her important. So basically, the Governor General of Canada, basically, you get the Prime Minister, you get the Governor General. Okay, so basically, what the Governor General role of Canada was to their act as the Queen's representative in Canada and the head of state. They give royal assent to pass bills in the House of Commons. They can sign state document and they read their own from the speech. So they're pretty significant in terms of their role and how to operate Canada as a country. So, you may think, oh, Prime Minister, so he's the guy that runs the whole country. But basically, no, it's the Governor General has a huge part of how to run the country as well. So Jean Sev, again, was the first woman cabinet member from Quebec. And she was the first Governor General. Okay, it's the first woman Speaker in the House of Commons and the first Governor General of Canada. Okay, also opened the first daycare on Parliament Hill. Okay, but what you need to remember for her is that she was the first Governor General of Canada. Okay, so she was number one. Okay, two. Next lady we want to talk about is Angina Clarkson. Angina Clarkson. Angine Clarkson. So what made her important in terms of Canadian women politics? Well, she was the first Canadian, first Chinese Canadian. Okay, so first Chinese Canadian, and the second woman to hold this position of the Governor General. Okay, so she was the second woman to hold to be a part of the Governor General of Canada. Okay, so Jameen Save was the first, and Adrienne Clarkson was the second. Okay, it's the first Chinese woman to hold the Governor General. Okay, yeah, so she was the first person of a visible minority to become the Governor General. Okay, what also made her important was that if you're reading a textbook, she was involved. She was involved in bringing Canadians together. Okay, she honored Canadians, famous Canadians, and promoted Canadian through films and arts and literature. Okay, so she really recognized uh, famous Canadians and what they did for Canada through arts, literature, and movies and films. Okay, Gina Clarkson. All right, three. Next person we'll talk about. I'll put her name in the box too. And Michelle Jean. Okay, what made her famous was that again she was also uh, at one point a Governor General of Canada. Okay, the Governor General of Canada, but she was the first black woman to be it. Okay, she was born in Haiti, uh, but she really was the first black woman to be in the Governor General. Okay, other key achievement she did was that she really emphasized issues in youth. She really emphasized Aboriginal Canadians, military arts, and fought violence against women's rights. Okay. Again, what made her famous that she was the first black Governor General of Canada. Okay, not a famous individual. Michelle Jean. Michelle Jean. And lastly, number four, last one we'll talk about is Kim Campbell. Kim Campbell. Again, you'll need to recognize her name as well. This person here. Kim Campbell. So what made her famous in terms of Canadian women politics? Well, she was the first woman to be named Prime Minister of Canada. Okay, the first woman Canadian Prime Minister of Canada. Okay, she was the first. Okay, so basically what happened was that Brian Mulroney, that name that we talked about earlier, he was Prime Minister. Then he, stepped down or retired as Prime Minister. So what happened is that Kim Campbell, decided to run for, the leadership and did some campaigns. And she was eventually, voted and won to become the leader of the Conservative Party. And as a result, she was the Prime Minister of Canada. Okay, she wasn't in power for long. She was only in power from June 25th to November 4th of 1993. Okay, so only a few short months of the same year. Okay, so after her term was up, we had another election, but she didn't, win that election. And it didn't win that vote, and she wasn't prime minister anymore. But she was the first prime minister woman Canadian prime minister, Kim Campbell. Kim Campbell. Okay. Yeah, so basically she didn't focus on debate, no, like debt in Canada. Sorry, she didn't focus on debt on Canada, rather than jobs. She refused to discuss social programs, which made her kind of unpopular, and that's why she wasn't voted again as prime minister. So, she didn't focus on key topics. That being said, uh, in about 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, we do have Canada federal election coming up. Okay, so please again make sure you go out there and vote. Vote for who you want to be in charge of Canada. Okay, because if you want to see change, this is how it's gonna start. Okay, so get out there and vote. It doesn't matter who you vote for, but just make sure you go out and vote. Because it will impact you and your generation of who's going to become, Prime Minister of Canada. Okay, so I think it's sometime October 19th or so, or something like that. So about 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks max. Make sure you go out there and vote. Okay, make sure you go out there and vote. Okay. So those are the four famous Canadian women in politics that was outlined in your textbook, and we just briefly talked about them. So just make sure you recognize their name and why they were significant in terms of Canadian women politics in Canada. That being said, all right, so on my next slide, you'll see this chart. So this chart is a part of your assignment 8. Assignment 8. Okay, so basically you gotta complete this chart. It's out of 10 marks. So give your thoughts about this person and his and her place in Canadian history with regards to the details provided in the course material. Okay, so make sure you use the facts in your textbook. Don't just make up stuff about these individuals. So we got Prime Minister Mackenzie King, Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Brian Mulroney, Jean Sev, and Adrienne Clarkson. So why were these individuals important in terms of Canadian history? Okay, so give your thought. Okay, so or give your thought. Again, Mackenzie King was back in like lesson 2 we talked about, so make sure you refer back to your materials and that. So basically what the question is asking you is like, give your thought on this individual. So for example, Trudeau, it could be like, oh, I think Trudeau was a mean individual because he decided to use the War Measures Act on Quebec citizens during the Quiet Revolution period. Okay, for example, or it could be like, oh, I think Pierre Trudeau was an excellent man because he stopped violence, he stopped the FLQ by using the War Measures Act. Okay, something like that. All right. Or I can say that Jean Sev was an excellent woman. Uh, was a woman because she was the first woman to step up and be the Governor General of Canada. Was such, okay? Some example. Again, each of these individuals out 2 marks. Out 2 marks. Again, I'll explain again next class. I know we're trying to zip through because I want to finish all this today. Such. Okay. Are there any questions right now? Any questions? Nate in Fort Hope, are you still on the line?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect, Nate. Okay, so Nate, how's everything going? Are you working on your PLARHG history assignments right now?
Yeah, I finished it.
Oh, you finished it, like the whole thing?
I'm on geography.
Oh, you're on geography. Great, great, great. Excellent. Again, like I said, I'm gonna be starting PLARHG geography next class. So again, you have any question about PLARHG geography, just ask. But so Nate, all your history assignments are now completed?
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Good stuff, buddy. So again, make sure you send that to me, fax it to me. That way I can mark it and give you your mark and give you some feedback as well. And then again, we're at this point where all PLARHG history assignments can now be completed. Okay, so there's 8 assignments. Okay, so which means that if you have successfully completed all 8 assignments, get in contact with me. We'll set up a date and time where you can write your PLARHG history tests. Okay, your tests. And I'll talk more about this next class. I'm running out of time, but are there any other questions right now?
Nope.
Nope. You okay, Nate? Excellent. Good stuff, buddy. Again, if you have any questions, please get a hold of me. Again, thank you for listening over there at your Learning Center in Fort Hope. I know a lot of community right now are, taking the time off because it's hunting week. Okay, but again, I appreciate all my students right now, wherever you may be. I